Welcome to Season 3 of Connecting with Purpose. In our first 2 seasons, we explored how leading and living with purpose unlocks unique potential for us and our teams. This season, we're diving into how purpose helps us navigate change, build resilience, and elevate our ongoing performance, well-being, and impact. A special focus I'm really excited about is to highlight the transition of elite athletes into new opportunities. By raising awareness around this largely untapped talent pool, we'll bridge opportunities with businesses to create meaningful connections, drive value, and deliver lasting impact. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Right, hello everyone. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 4 of Connecting with Purpose. I'm really excited to have Gina Tucci with me here today. She's the founder of Beyond the Scoreboards, and she's been really immersed in sports and athletic competition her whole life, and therefore a super relevant guest for Season 3 of Connecting with Purpose, where we're looking to really explore the intersections between sports and elite athletes in the corporate world and sort of bridge some gaps, especially around transition. And Gina is a mental performance coach. She's licensed in Colorado with her own private practice, which enables her to really live her passion and bring her background in sports and performance psychology with a lens of mental health and counselling people in order to really create solutions and programs for people that really break through roadblocks and take them to the next level. Gina was at Resilience Code in Denver, where she created a program called MindCode, which was about addressing clients' mental health and performance challenges. She's got all the academic credentials to back all this up, with a certificate in sports psychology from Seton Hall, masters in educational degrees in counselling, but ultimately years and years of working with athletes, coaches and executives at all different levels. And it's so brilliant for us to be able to get her insights into how the mental elements and the mental toolbox people need can really help people break through to the next level, not just in sports, but in their career and in life. So, Gina, thank you so much for joining us here on Connecting with Purpose.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, I teed this up with you, and the audience that have listened before know, and for those of you that are new, we have to start with magic moments. And we do this as a way of people getting to know our guests, really intimately to kick off the podcast. And magic moments are moments when you look back on your career and life, because they don't have to just be professional moments. They're 3 moments that really stand out that, with the benefit of time, you'd give them a 10 out of 10. But you give them a 10 out of 10 for 2 reasons. One, because of how you performed in the moment itself. And 2, because of the impact that moment had on what came next in your life. And then to that end, therefore, magic moments can be super positive, engaging experiences, or they could be actually really big challenges or even traumatic things sometimes that people have had to overcome. But with the benefit of time, you look back on it, even though it may not have felt brilliant at the time, that was a 10 out of 10. So the quick fire questions for you on this, Gina, but there's no rush in answering these. If you could think of 3 moments that stand out to you in your life, what were the moments? What is it about them that made them magic? And if you had to give each of them a name, what would you call them?
Yeah, I love this question. I think this is brilliant. So the first one that comes to mind for me was when I was 13 years old, and I'm not sure that it fits all of the criteria, but it is definitely something that, in retrospect, in hindsight, for me, is one of my magic moments. And it came during a time of crisis. My mom was sick. She had cancer, and so she was going through chemotherapy treatments, and treatments that, like, they were so harsh on the body they don't even use them anymore. And she had a reaction one night and had a massive seizure. And so that particular moment was really super traumatic. And so after that night, I ended up sleeping with her for weeks, maybe months. I don't even remember. But on one of these particular nights, every movement she made, I was like startled and worried and concerned about her. But this one particular night, I heard her breathing, and I was like, "Mom, are you okay?" And she said, she's like, "Yeah, I'm just doing my deep breathing." And I said, you know, "Okay." And she said, "It helps me to relax." And she said, "And when I do my breathing," she said, "I visualize Pac-Man." Pac-Man was big at the time. And she's like, "And I visualize, the medicine and the chemotherapy as Pac-Man eating up the ghosts that are the cancer cells in my body." And so it really, I thought it was kind of weird when I was 13. I was like, okay, she's really losing it. Um, but in hindsight, like as I continued with my athletic career and as I dove deeper into sports psychology, I'm like, oh my gosh, my mother was my first trainer in diaphragmatic breathing and deep breathing and the power of the breath and visualization. Um, and so I always think back to that, and I was like, wow, that was so brilliant. And like I'm not sure if I ever thanked her for that, but I really should because that was one of my first. Um, so
What would you call it?
I would call that Pac-Man. I have to name it
Oh,
Pac.
that's brilliant. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Um, my second one, uh, my second one was more of an aha moment for me, and it was really I came into the field of sports psychology not because I was such a great athlete, but because I had struggled tremendously with performance anxiety. And I just I would went through this phase of my life in particularly in junior senior year of high school soccer, and I would do fine in practice, and I'd be okay, and then I would get an opportunity in a game and just fall apart completely, and had no it felt like I had cinder blocks on my legs, and I just had no rhyme or reason about that. So much so by the time I got to the end of my senior year, I'm like, I wanted nothing to do with soccer because it felt so painful to me, and so it made me question myself, like what was wrong with me. And so my magic moment was my spring semester of my freshman year. I took a class, Sports Psychology 101, with a professor named Diana McNabb. And that class was like the biggest aha moment for me. I mean, that first day of class, I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that what I was thinking or the emotions I had could impact my body in such a way, like, and how my body was performing, and my ability to like actually control my, physical body. And so that that was the moment that I like actually fell in love with sports psychology. And I thought, I cannot be the only person who's going through this. And so I wanted to learn more. I became totally obsessed with it. And so that was my other magic moment. And if I had to name it, I think I'd probably call it the Epiphany.
Mm, lovely.
Yeah.
These you got some great names here. Pac-Man, the Epiphany.
Yeah.
So
My future
what's the
book.
third one to round it out?
Yeah, so the third one was actually I was um, training for a marathon, and I was a distance runner. I started distance running in college after I gave up soccer, and I said, okay, I still needed something to like fuel my competitive fire. And so I started distance running, which was about the only thing that I was really good at in soccer anyway, was that I could run forever. And so, I was the midfielder, and that's like basically what I did. So I started running distances, and I decided I wanted to train for a marathon. And so I was living in Italy at the time, and I had done a first marathon with a couple of guys that I had become my running partners over there. And I hadn't really even planned on that one, but they were like, no, they were training for some crazy event in the Sahara Desert. And they said, well, we're going to do this training run. So we did that, and it was fine. And it was like kind of low pressure, covered the distance. So I had that confidence that I knew I could cover the distance. My big race was going to be in San Diego, the Rock and Roll Marathon. in San Diego, and I was running with like Team in Training, which was the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I was running in honor of my mom. And um, when I went into it, I was super nervous about it, but um, when I started the race, this kind of calm came over me, and I remember saying to myself, I've got nothing to lose. Like, I've got nothing to lose here. Like, nobody knows who I am. I don't have anything going on here. And so I ended up, that was it actually, I ended up running much faster than I could have possibly imagined. It was certainly a PR for me. And even it was a PR even beyond that. But um, I ended up missing qualifying for Boston by 1 minute because I had no idea how fast I was running. So I found that out afterwards, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known. But the lesson that came out of that was that the whole time I was running, I just kind of kept thinking like, okay, I'm feeling okay. Like, let's just see what happens. Let's just see what happens next. And so I think what I learned from that was how to be able to attach from expectations and outcomes. So I wasn't ever thinking about crossing the finish line. I was just kind of thinking about what was in front of me. And this idea that like it didn't matter, the only outcome that I was committed to and guaranteed to myself was that I was going to finish that race no matter what. So if I had to walk or crawl across the finish line, that's what was going to happen. Um, but in the meantime, I was going to kind of have fun and push my body and see, like, just say, let's see what happens. And so that piece about being able to disconnect from expectations was something that I actually started to really apply to my distance running. And I love doing half marathons, kind of more so. I did some other marathons as well, but and that was so valuable to me and helped me tremendously.
Gosh, and the name for that one,
It has to be rock and roll.
rock
Just
and
in honor of the rock
roll.
and roll marathon.
Rock and roll. Well,
Yeah,
and rock and roll because of the name, the event, but also rock and roll in terms of just like being in the moment and being
yeah,
present and understanding your body and just keeping the pushing yourself without really worrying about what's the time, am I going to get a PR? But it really just kind of going with that kind of rhythm, harmony, and flow, right?
yeah,
That you find in
totally.
the music world, like you found that running, and it was primarily for you by resetting your expectations around the only thing that matters is that I finish.
Hmm.
And that enabled you to take the pressure off a little bit and be present, right? And there's
Yeah,
there's a theme across these three magic moments, as there often is, which is brilliant. Pac-Man, Pac-Man was this sort of first insight into sort of deep breathing and visualization, right? And of course that visualization of Pac-Man, everybody's like, "Yep, I get it," right, straight away. And then obviously your epiphany in terms of finding a field that really spoke to you, and then actually sort of putting that into practice. If you just not just sort of taking those as a thread, but then just thinking through, if you like, the phases you went through in your athletic career. How do you feel those things showed up for you and maybe informed your journey as an athlete that led you to getting to where you are now?
I think my when I think back about, how did I get into sports? Like, how did I, where did all that come from? I have to say, like, it started at a really young age with like this desire to connect with my dad. He was always an athlete, really good, a good amateur athlete. Played every sport, played them, really, really well. He coached a bunch of different sports, and I think I saw sports and participating in sports as a way of like connecting with him.
Mm.
Um, and so, early on, I took a stab at baseball and failed miserably at that, and like tried to do things that he was doing, but didn't really find my way into to kind of my own athletic um, space until high school and then college. With running, and then later with like martial arts and competing in martial arts. But I, as I think back to like, where did those things kind of show up for me and how did I apply them? I always think back to like injuries, that I had suffered and having surgeries and different things like that. Because, again, having a mom who went through some pretty heavy like medical history and medical stuff, um, that first of all gave me perspective with respect to like my own injuries and my own surgeries of like, I had seen what she'd been through, and I was like, I know I can take this. I know I can, there was sort of a toughness that I extracted from her in the sense of like, this is just a step on the path. Like, this surgery, this injury, this whatever is not gonna define my future or my athletic career. It's just a step on the path. And so shifting that, shifting my mindset. Um, Unfortunately, I've had quite a few surgeries, so I've had a lot of practice with actually shifting my mindset to saying like, this is just a different part of my training. Like this is still training, but this is a different part of my training, and now I have to kind of back things up a little bit, and again, sort of, releasing myself from the expectation of, oh, when I come back from this surgery, I'm going to run a sub 7 mile, versus just saying like, this is where I am now. I'm going to re-strengthen my body. I'm going to come back stronger than I was before, and kind of moving through things that way. And then I also took like her, I took what she had taught me about visualization, and I put that into practice, through rehabilitation and through training. And so I definitely applied all of those
Mm.
little pieces.
I love that, and I'll dig into a couple of things there because there's a couple of themes already that have shown up. You spoke about performance anxiety, and I talk a lot about helping people perform under pressure. And when you understand the formula, and this starts with understanding yourself first, right? So deep self-reflection to understand. But once you understand the formula of how you can, I call it in rugby terms, like convert pressure into points, get forward momentum for pressure, you can actually use pressure to your advantage, which in a business setting can be a competitive advantage, and on the field of athletics can be the difference between a win and a loss. So there's this pressure element on one side, and on the other side, and they're not opposite sort of perspectives here. There's this resilience element, right? What if you had to summarize, on the last piece on the resilience, like what would be some of the characteristics you need to exhibit, or maybe practices that you can take on, to help build your resilience, whether it's an injury, in the sports field and coming back stronger, or whether it's a misstep in business that you've got to learn from and sort of come back stronger from. What would you say would be 2 or 3 things that you think people need to keep front of mind if they're interested in building resilience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, for me, in reflecting back on, um, my journey and my path in athletics, I had a real sort of recognition of the fact that I was stuck for a long time in a very fixed mindset. I was like the poster child for the fixed mindset. And so, I think that's one of the things that I had to learn and start to challenge myself, was, okay, how do you shift some of that? Like, is that really serving me? Is that mindset serving me in any way? And how do I start to shift that? And for me, what I recognized was one of my strengths was like, I did like discomfort. I like to do hard things. I liked that I could, you know, tolerate challenge and the discomfort of pushing myself. And so I think that's one of the things, when we talk about like, how do you coach up resilience, or it is first recognizing that things are supposed to be hard. And second, things are supposed to take a long time. Anything worth doing is going to be difficult and it's going to take some time. And I think that's unfortunately one of the messages that a lot of young people get today, which is a disservice, in my opinion, is that, they kind of come away with this idea that, like, it's supposed to be easy, or, things happen with luck, and, and so on and so forth, which is a really disempowering belief system. But for me, what resilience is all about, understanding that, like, the fact that something's difficult or challenging, or that you fail along the way, is not an indicator that you're on the wrong path, right? But it's actually part of that path that you're supposed to be on. Because if you think about anything in your life that you're actually proud of, or that you look back and you say, wow, that was great, I'm so happy that I did that. There's nothing that has occurred or that you've accomplished that hasn't been accomplished through challenges and obstacles and overcoming those things. So
Yeah.
that's,
No, they're three. I think they're three incredibly powerful steps, right? Which is, like, one, things are going to be hard. Two, hard things take a long time. And at least having the patience and the understanding to give yourself a bit of grace in understanding where you're at in that journey. And then three, to that last point, like, you are where you're meant to be. Like, this is life, and it's what you take from it that's going to make the difference. And you just reminded me, I read this, it might have just been last week. I think it was on Kevin Roberts's blog, and he quoted someone else on it, so I'm not going to get to the source. But it was about luck, and it was basically, the summary of it is, luck is where preparation and opportunity meet.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the preparation piece, isn't it, that is so key, because once you've failed at something and you learn from what went wrong and fix it, which requires you going from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, which was the first point you made, and then embracing that discomfort, as you said, in that all the learnings and challenges and improvements happen at the edge when you're trying something new, or trying something different, or trying something for the first time. That when you prepare and then practice that enough, you prove to yourself you can do it, and then the growth mindset takes you to the next level. And that's where I think this is so helpful for people, right? Because just understanding those three things, like, hard things are supposed to be hard, hard things take a long time, and you are where you're meant to be, and understanding that you learn from it and you can improve, embracing the growth mindset along the way, is a super simple way to build resilience, right? And there'll be all sorts of other models on that, but resilience is this thing and loads of people talk about, and a lot of people don't know how to achieve. So then the other piece I was talking about was kind of pressure. So performance anxiety, you experience that a lot. Obviously, it's a big part of your work with athletes and with executives and other people. How does pressure show up for people, and what's the difference between somebody that's worked out how to convert pressure into points versus somebody that just sort of tends to cave, fold, or maybe go back or close up under pressure?
Yeah. Pressure is subjective, right? So if you put me in front of some athletes to talk about sports psychology, like, that doesn't feel like a huge pressure for me, because I've lived it, and I, work in that space, and, I'm passionate about it. That's kind of an easy ask for me. Now, if you hand me a scalpel and walk me into an operating room and say, here, save this person's life, all of a sudden that becomes a huge, pressure-filled moment, and I'll probably, crumble, because I don't have the skills and the tools to meet the task requirements. So there's something to be said there, right? Kind of to reflect back to the idea of preparation, and what kind of tools do you have in your toolbox, and are they, within reason to meet the requirements of the task. But the other thing is, and what I've learned, is the power of perspective, and understanding that, like, for example, if you're a hockey player and you're playing in, like, the big game, like you're playing in, the game of your life, like the Beanpot is a big game, a big series in Boston, for example, and that's a really easy place to feel like, oh my gosh, this is so much pressure, and so on and so forth. But first I would start by asking, like, okay, well, what's different about this particular hockey game? Are they changing the rules of hockey? Are they changing the number of people that are allowed on the ice? Are they changing, like what your strategy should be? And generally the answer to all those questions is no. It's still the same game, you know, which if you've done your preparation, if you have done your training, if as a team you've prepared and so on, then it's really about defining, well, what is your job in that particular, in that event or that game or whatever it is. What's your job on the ice, for example? What's your job off the ice? Because your job continues whether you're on the ice or not. So, and again, it comes down to separating from the thinking about the outcome to bringing it back to being where your feet are, right? Like, and being in that present moment, and kind of simplifying. So I think, pressure exists because there are those expectations of, like, of capability. The pressure's there because it's like, well, we expect that you're capable of doing that, which in itself is a privilege and an honor. But at some point you have to, in order to achieve that, or to rise to the level of those expectations, you have to back up from them. You have to be able to separate yourself from the expectations down to what got you there in the first place, what earned you the right to have that pressure.
Yeah, I'm smiling. I'm smiling only because our work's obviously very aligned, right? And I don't have the counselling background on this. I'm coming at it very much from a coaching perspective and from an athletic perspective, from my experience. But for me, everything starts with perspective, and I think that is just such, reframing the perspective is the first thing you can do to alleviate or start to manipulate pressure to your own advantage, because pressure is all external. It's all externalities that you choose to embrace as expectations that you're putting on yourself, because actually none of those other expectations matter. And exactly what you said, which is, once you understand that and you reframe your perspective and you've put in the preparation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The preparation is absolutely key. That then you can be present. There's always so many P's that show up around pressure, I
Yeah.
feel. Then you can be present, understanding that how you got here in the first place, and actually nothing has changed. This is all external. So I'm going to focus on what I can control and what I know to be true and what I know to be really good at. And that enables me to be present in the moment. That alleviates all the pressure, and then you're just focused on the next P, which is the performance. Yeah, we could write multiple books on P's. But one other P that came up that I'm actually really interested in, and this is kind of from personal experience, is passion.
Mm.
I think passion is such a really interesting element. Lots of people would say, "Oh, you're really like they say to me, I'm really passionate when I'm speaking about something or when I'm coaching," and I am, because I believe in it, and the things I believe in and care about, and I know can have an impact. I kind of get passionate about. But passion also has a flip side to it, and I think back to my non-profit times, right, where I was so passionate about impacting kids that actually that passion almost drove me to do too much and spread myself too thin, and then you end up putting undue pressure on yourself in a way, because you've let that passion go unbridled. How do you help people embrace passion for performance, and in a way that enables them to maybe enjoy a bit more harmony in life, versus passion can lead to pressure?
Yeah. I think, what you just described is really interesting, because it's almost like where passion goes into obsession,
Hmm.
right? And there's a difference there, because, obsession can end up being very enervating and, like, just draining, when it's not, to use your word, bridled, like, but I think when you have something that you're passionate about, um, the importance of balance, is really key. And I think you do that by getting really clear on what it is that you want, and setting goals around those things, setting actionable goals around what it is that you want and what it is that kind of lights your fire, and what does it look like to live that in action.
Yeah. Which enables you to point your passion towards specific milestones and finite things you're looking to achieve, not just let it take you off to that place of obsession, which I think you absolutely nailed that. Actually, I think from my only from my own professional experience when I was running the non-profit, that maybe I was getting a bit too obsessed with growth and participation and impact versus really being very, very clear with the practical goals and milestones we need to achieve, and say that's the application of passion right here. And passion is part of the model we talk about, a purpose fused for purpose. So we talk about purpose as being passion plus impact plus application, which literally hits on the three things you said, right? So the impact for me is the goals in terms of the impact we want to make on other people and what that looks like. The passion is this energy you put towards that around applying your best self characteristics to the things you care about and that you believe in, that you're good at, that you enjoy, energize you. And the application is, well, actually, what does this look like day to day in this setting, in this setting, in this setting? Long-winded way of getting to another P, purpose. Whether it is just your own experience or whether it is from your observations of clients that you've worked with, how does purpose play into this journey for people in terms of their ability to build resilience, their ability to deal with pressure, their ability to perform? How do you see purpose playing into that?
So I think that, purpose, and we talk about finding your purpose and what is my purpose. And I think for athletes in particular, for a long time, for people that have really dedicated their life to sports and athletics, that's part of their purpose, or that is their purpose for such a long period of time. And shifting away from that, or going through a transition, and now to find what's my purpose now kind of thing, can be really, really challenging for some people. And I think that, reflecting on exactly what you just said, resilience and hard work and, being goal driven and all of those characteristics that we use and we apply when we're competing and we're playing sports, and seeing those as transferable skills into our next chapter or into the next activity we do. And there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not doing something, in either my work life or my professional life, or I'm kind of recalling little micro lessons that I've learned along the way, most often through sports, because that was the lens that I kind of look through, right? So I think the idea of being able to recognize, what are those skills that I've developed during that period of my life, or if you're still in that period of your life, and how do those tools and skills relate to, what's kind of lighting me up now, and what I feel called to.
Yeah, I think what's lighting me up now and what does light me up and what could light me up is a nice way of just thinking about those elements, because I feel like the part of the challenge for athletes, but honestly anybody going through change, and it's just exacerbated for athletes as it is similarly to first responders, it is similar to for military folks, is you have to be so completely and utterly focused in that role and the things that enable you to perform week in, week out, because that literally is your life and it's such a massive part of your life and therefore your identity, that the first thing you have to do is actually get to know yourself again and say, well, actually, that's my identity, but actually just as a role. That was a role. My ego's wrapped up in that. I had community, I had support, I had performance, I had all these things and structure, lots of structure. Right. Now I don't have that, but actually the essence of me is still the same. Like, what does light me up? And, when I think about my purpose, which is creating opportunities that inspire people to go forward as the ultimate version of themselves, that would have been the same back when I was playing rugby 10 years ago. How I applied it on the field is very different to how I coach people now, but it was still my purpose. It was still a thing that drove me. How can I inspire the guys to be at their best and get better and do that together? And that's what I think is so hard for people to sort of get to. Once you get there, it's a bridge. It's a really powerful bridge that reframes your perspective about what could be next. Because you're not just thinking about roles, you're thinking about the essence of your best self, the difference you can make, and then of course there's all sorts of things that you can explore around that. And so when we're sort of on this theme of the bridge and transitions and those sorts of things, what have you observed maybe to be some of the top few challenges that you see elite level athletes having to overcome when they are transitioning from their role as a performing athlete to some other form of role in life?
Yeah. Um, in my experience, and I've thought a lot about this over the last couple of years, where I feel like, for those of us who serve athletes in transition, or military folks that are in transition, or whoever is going through a transition, because to your point, like, that's one thing none of us escape. It's almost like you can put it on there with death and taxes and transitions, because we will all go through transitions at different times. I think that the miss with athletes is not recognizing, or not knowing, or maybe not being prepared for the fact that it's not just the role that you're stepping away from. It's really the biopsychosocial aspect. So if you think of it as kind of like a trifecta, of like the biology changes, your biology changes when you stop competing at a high level. Whether that's, you can talk about neurochemicals, and, which is not not in my wheelhouse to talk about, other than at a really basic level, but there are changes in, in your body chemistry when you stop competing. There's changes in your body composition, depending on, to what extent you continue with some sort of training or workouts and so on. There are all of these different changes from a biological side of things, but then from a psychological side of things, the most obvious one, that people do talk about a fair amount, is the idea of identity. And sure, there is definitely that piece, that is important to attend to, but there's also, with respect to psychological changes, they're also confronted with, sometimes a sense of uncertainty. And again, I look at every time that I experienced an injury that kept me out of my sport for a while, that was a transitional period. There was a whole process of transition in that. And I think, like, change is really hard. It's really humbling. And it's humbling because it brings up all these feelings of uncertainty. So psychologically, like, we have to confront those things. And then socially, there's, of course, losing the locker room, or losing your platoon, or, like, losing that sense of team and community, can be a very sort of isolating feeling for athletes as well.
Yeah, and I love that BPS, psychological social, because it's so holistic, and that's the reality. And all of those things interplay, right? Because we're one person, one system that interplays
Right.
with so many others, and so understanding those and then being able to look at how they deal with each one of them and how they interact, is a really powerful holistic way of looking at it, for anyone in transition, right? But we're not picking on, but we're focusing on the
Sure.
athlete piece here. And what's then the flip side of that? Then, if there's some of the challenges / opportunities, depending on how people approach them, for experiencing some success coming next, two lenses on this, I guess. What should be the focus for the athlete themselves? What can they do to give themselves the best chance of getting through a transition in a way that they'd be proud of? And then related to that, let's just take companies as an example, where there's obviously, that's just an area that a number of athletes may want to be ending up in. What would be things that companies can do to help athletes with the transition, but in a way that ultimately the company's going to benefit from, because these athletes have got certain characteristics and drive that ultimately should align, and there's lots of research showing this, to driving success in the business. So what are those things that the athlete and maybe companies, just as one area, could focus on to help get that athlete through transition to a place of high performance in the corporate space?
One of the things that comes to mind, I've never been asked that question. It's a really interesting question. But one of the things that come to mind is to have programs for, not just for their athletes, other employees as well, but have programs that really help develop the person's like sense of self and like who they are, at their core. Like, what are their sort of core virtues, their core values, and then what do those things look like in action, when they're at their best, whether it's been, in a competitive environment or not, but when they've shown up as their sort of best self, in life. And so programs that like really help to build that sense of identity in who somebody is, because I think especially with athletes, when you've grown up in sports, a lot of times we tend to get the message that like our value and our worth comes from what we're doing, from our accomplishments, from our achievements, from, did you make that team? Did you not? Those kinds of things, versus who we are as people, as individuals, as human beings, and sort of in our collective humanity. So from a company side of things, I think when you can like help people to extrapolate their best self of actually who they are, it becomes easier and more tangible for people to start to see, oh, I can apply this to my sales role. I can apply this to, my job in human, resources, or whatever the role is.
Yeah. This resonates so much because I think from a lot of my corporate work, leadership work, both coaching, facilitation, and work in team performance stuff, and I summarized this a lot this week when I was chatting to people and catching up with people back in New York. If I had to massively oversimplify one of the biggest opportunities in business with leaders and with their teams in one word, it's knowing. And that is exactly what you just said. It's when do leaders generally and athletes, right? And this is incredibly important for athletes to do before they start transitioning, take the time to step back, really, really reflect and come up with those values, virtues, and how you apply them in different areas of your life. Point them towards things that you really care about that can make a difference, right? And that becomes, you've got your North Star of your impact, and you kind of like your I call them principles, but your virtues and action, your values and action, that literally define you at your best. When you really know that about yourself, and then guess what? You do it with other people, and you get to know it about your team. You get to know people from inside out. You can connect with them on a completely different level. You can contribute where you can drive the most value. You can complement each other better. I mean, this is no different than positions in sports.
Absolutely.
But in sports, we have positions, and we have roles in companies, but roles tend to be primarily competency based. Sometimes a bit of personality might come into it, but it's so much more than that, right? It's about the energy and the contributions and understanding. It starts with knowing yourself, absolutely, knowing each other. And I think that's something that companies can facilitate and athletes can commit to, just like leaders can commit to, or anyone can commit to, that really helps elevate opportunities for everybody. So that's awesome. So I'm just aware of the time, so I want to flip back to you, and we'll call this the 2-minute warning. I haven't called it that before. Didn't come up with something else, so I'm just stealing it from football of all things. Maybe I'll come up with a better rugby one for next time. But 2-minute warning. 3 or 4 quick fire questions that are aligned to what we've been talking about, but really just from your perspective, and you haven't had time to prepare for these, so you're just going to have to go with it, right? In the moment, be present. Yeah. You've been prepared for this. There's no pressure. So let's see how you go. Right. The first one would be, when you think about impact, when you think about specifically the impact you would like to have on just people you tend to surround yourself with in life, we call it our we, so our we impact. If you had to summarize the impact you wanted to create in 3 or 4 words, what would the words be that you'd want people to say about you that has been the impact that you've had on them?
I think I would want people to say that I help them raise their level of mental strength by helping them learn the value and the how to apply mental fitness tools.
Mental strength and mental fitness tools and how to
Mm.
apply them. Yeah. Can you one dive down on that? The 3 front of mind things everybody should think about if they want to work on their mental fitness.
Self-awareness, resilience slash anti-fragile confidence, and self-regulation.
Brilliant. Some people may not be familiar with anti-fragility, but anti-fragility essentially is what I was talking about earlier, which is like using pressure and stress, using stress for success, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
understanding how to take that and create it into forward momentum as opposed to it being something that holds you back. So you
Yeah,
could do a whole podcast just on that. But
totally.
yeah, what are your, I mean, just on that, because I think it's quite a new concept for some folks and it's been around for 10 years or so. But what's your takeaway on anti-fragility and sort of if you were to summarize it for the layman?
Yeah, so I like to make a distinction between, like, what's fragile. If you think about, a wine glass falling on the floor, it's going to break. If you think about Tupperware is resilient. If it falls on the floor, it's going to bounce a little bit. It's not going to be damaged. It's not going to break, but it's also not going to be any stronger than it was before the fall. When I think of anti-fragility, I immediately think of like the redwood trees in California, and the fact that they are the tallest, strongest trees in the world. And it's because they have to adapt and endure the harsh coastal climate. And so they are so hard. But also the other part to that is that their root system grows laterally and ends up connecting with the other root systems of the other trees. And so I
Yeah.
think that there's a cool message in that as well, that like through our obstacles and our challenges, we become more anti-fragile, but also we can create and share that anti-fragility with other people and help to make them stronger as well. And strength, it kind of comes back to us. So
Yeah,
that's
I remember really fondly walking through the redwoods there, and you just get that sense, right? But it's about the roots, right? It's literally about that connectivity and that understanding of together we're stronger, and like who can you connect to, as well as just being grounded and anchored
yeah.
in who you are, which is the self-awareness part that's the beginning of building any type of anti-fragility. So awesome. Last question then. What's
Yeah.
next for Gina?
Well, what's next for me is just talking to as many people as I can, whether it's, individuals in my work, and doing some more kind of group work, group programming and workshops and those kinds of things, to do exactly what I had mentioned before about, coaching up mental strength through the tools of mental fitness. Because I think mental fitness is universal. That's something that everybody can benefit from. Everybody can, you know, can find value in, and I think that that is the foundation of sort of human resilience. And I don't think it gets enough attention.
Yeah, and so you got me all energized again, right back to our very first conversation, which I don't think it was a year ago, but it was over the summer last year, right? So it's probably only 9 months ago, and we're like, we've got to get in a room together and deliver some of this stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
which we do. So actually now we actually connected on LinkedIn after 9 months.
Yeah.
We're note to selves. We need to explore that together, I think. And where can people find more about you, Gina?
So my website is beyondthescoreboards.com, and that's also my Instagram and my LinkedIn as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Beyond the scoreboards. You know what? We better just close out with why it's called that.
Well, so I chose that name because of what I kind of commented on this before, this idea of, value and worth coming from what you do versus who you are. And so I felt like Beyond the Scoreboards captured that idea that, the people will forget what the final score of the game was. And I think of Maya Angelou's quote, like, they'll forget what you do and they'll forget these accomplishments that you've had, but they won't forget how how you made somebody feel. And so I just think that, our value and worth as human beings is beyond the scoreboards, beyond that final score. So
um, love that to close out and end on, because it obviously just summarizes really where you came from, why you do what you do, and obviously have a lot of respect for that. We've always had some great conversations here, and really appreciate you sharing some of your wisdom with our guests here at Connecting with Purpose.
thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's so fun. It's so fun to talk to you, Mark.
You're very welcome. Take care.